morning. We're ready for our second Heritage Studies lesson for the week. We're going to be on lesson 2. So if you would, in your book, turn to page 6. We're going to have 3 pages today, 6, 7, and 8. Now, remember from our lesson yesterday, according to 2 Samuel 23, 3 through 4, do you remember that verse? According to that, what will a just ruler be like? The light of the morning, a morning without clouds, the tender grass. Now, how does a ruler show that he's obeying God, obeying the first 2 commandments? How does he show that? Because he will love God with all his heart, and he will love others as he loves himself. The first and the second greatest commandment given by our Lord Jesus Christ. All right, so let's look up here at page 6. This is the people come to America, the first Americans. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to read this page right here to you. We're going to figure out what we're looking for and kind of ask a couple of questions about that, and you're going to end up reading the next page, okay? Silently to yourself. All right, so let's look up here at this page. Now, I want you to listen, and I want you to identify the people who came to America to worship God the way the Bible teaches. I want you to listen for those people, okay? Early in the world's history, God scattered people all over the earth. Some people found their way to North and South America. Most historians think the people traveled across the Bering Strait. Now stop right there. Look over on the other side on page 7 at the bottom where you see that map. Now let's find the Bering Strait. Now do you see where it says North America? Okay, you see the red arrow? Okay, go up just a little bit to the left and you'll see where the light brown meets the dark brown, and right in the middle there's a white thing that says the Bering Strait. Now a long time ago, we're pretty certain that those 2 continents, which the one on the left would be Asia, the one on the right of course is North America, where Canada, the United States, and Mexico are. And right in the center, they touch just with this small strip of land, and that was called the Bering Strait. Okay, and so we're pretty certain, well, it's called the Bering Strait now, but we're pretty certain that people from Asia went up and crossed over that land bridge and came into North America, and that's how we ended up having people in South America, and people in Mexico, and people in North America, or in the America, and then in Canada. People settled there as time went on. All right, so let's keep reading on page 6. Some people found their way to Central America. There they built large cities. Thousands of people lived in these cities, which were filled with beautiful statues and buildings. Today, people still travel to see the pyramids these early Americans built. The early people in Central America also knew how to grow food. Maize or corn was not good for people to eat at first, but early Central Americans learned ways to grow it and make it into a good food. The early Americans built great civilizations. Christians should not be surprised by this. People are able to do great things because God created people in his image. Because they bear his image, people were able to rule over his creation. But although these civilizations inspire wonder and astonishment, the people in them were not always good. Sin hurt the civilizations. People worshipped false gods. Sometimes they sacrificed other humans to these gods. Christians can learn 2 things from these civilizations. People have the ability to do good because God created them in his image, but people often do great evil. This is because they are sinners and because we live in a world that's been cursed, not by God's account, but by man's account. So we didn't find the people yet who came to America. It must be on the next page. We'll read that in just a second. Wow. All right, so when these people came into North America and then they went down into South America, they were able to build these great cities. These people say all the time how people back in the early days were just Stone Age people. They didn't know how to do anything. They couldn't make anything. They weren't very smart. Well, Have they ever looked at the things that those early people built? Because they're pretty beautiful. And I've looked before and I'm thinking, how did they build that stuff? Well, that's because God made man in his own image. And so man has been able to subdue the earth and use the things that God's given us. All right, so let's look at the next page, on page 7, where it says Europeans. This is where we're going to find out who it was that wanted to come to America so that they could worship God the way the Bible teaches. So let's look at page 7. I want you to pause this, and I want you to silently read and see if you can find out the names. I think there's 2 groups of people that you're going to find that came over for that reason, okay? So go ahead and pause it as you read. All right, did you find out why they came? Or is it in there? Because I didn't read it. I think it is. All right, I think it's in the last paragraph. Some colonists came to the New World because they could not find work in their home country. Some came because they could not worship God the way the Bible taught in their home country. This is why the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to America. All right, that's why they came over, is because they wanted to worship God. Now, where they lived, which was in Europe, the people there were forced to go to the king's church. They had to go there, and they could only worship the way that the king and the leaders of the church told them that they could worship. They couldn't do anything on their own. And so that was not good for them, and they didn't want to do that. They wanted to worship the way they wanted to worship. Now, if you look at the map, that shows you some routes that they took. Different, obviously they didn't fly on an airplane. They had to be on a boat, a ship. And these are some of the routes that they took to get to where they needed to be. Now, the Pilgrims actually were not pilgrims. Well, they were, but before they became pilgrims, when they lived in Europe, they were called separatists. You had 2 groups of people. You had separatists and you had pilgrims. A separatist, it has the root word separate or separate. They wanted to break off and become separate from the Church of England. They didn't want to be a part of that. They wanted to be something totally different. Well, they were getting persecuted and fined and everything else because that was against the law. That was illegal. Now, they became pilgrims when they began to get on ships and make the journey over to the New World, because anybody that travels is a pilgrim. Somebody that travels from one home to their next home is a pilgrim. And so that's why they were actually separatists, but they were named pilgrims because they went on a pilgrimage. Now, the Puritans has the root word pure because they wanted to purify the Church of England. They wanted to make it better, but I don't believe that was going to work. All right, let's look at the last page today, on page 8. All right, so when they came to America, the first pilgrims that came over, they were on the Mayflower, and they came over and they parked their ship in the water, and they were far from the land. Now, they had been on the ship for, I think, 3 months. Before they got off the ship, they said, no, wait a minute, because on this ship, it wasn't just pilgrims. You had pilgrims, and you had the people that owned the ship, and these people sometimes were not very good people. And then you had other people who were not pilgrims. So you had all different kinds of people. And they said, now, wait a minute. The pilgrims said, before we get off this boat, and before we go into this new land, we've got to sit down and we've got to have some rules to live by. And those rules that they wrote down became known as the Mayflower Compact. I think that was a pretty wise decision, don't you? That way, when they all got off, they had some rules to go by. It would be pretty chaotic not to have any rules when you were in a new land. Let's look at page 8. I'm going to read now. You have to follow along with me, okay? People are not naturally good. This is one reason they need governments. Government is God's way to keep people from acting wickedly. The colonies in the New World were under governments in Europe, but Europe was a long way away. Government was needed in the colonies too. The Pilgrims and the Puritans in America wanted a government that pleased God. They wanted their leaders to be Christian. They wanted people to be like Christians, and not just at church, but at home and at work and in all that they did. The Pilgrims and the Puritans made good laws that tried to keep people from sinning against God and others. But the governments in the American colonies didn't always do what pleased God. They were not always just. Sometimes they mistreated the Indians who lived nearby. These early governments also permitted slavery in their colonies. Many Africans were brought as slaves to work for the Europeans in the colonies. The Africans were not treated justly. If someone wronged them, they couldn't take that person to court. They could marry only another black person, and their children would be slaves for life also. And so that was a dark time in American history. So the Indians were persecuted. Well, the Native Americans, we call them, that not really Indians. And the black slaves that were brought over. And there were lots and lots of white people that also came over as what was known as an indentured servant. That means they were extremely poor. And the only way they could come over to the New World was if they signed a contract to be someone's servant for 7 years. I think it was 7 years. And then after that, they would hopefully get their freedom. And sometimes these indentured servants did not have good masters. So it wasn't just Native Americans, and it wasn't just black people. It was lots of people that were not treated fairly. So governments are not perfect, but it is better when you have a government that's based on God's laws, for sure. All right. Since you've already done your work text pages for this, you don't have to do any work text pages today. I'll give you an optional assignment. You do not have to do this unless you want to. If you would like to construct a pilgrim village, and I think you can look it up online. They didn't have that many buildings because they didn't have a lot of time to build things. They had a big building. They had a building where lots of the families would stay. Then they'd have a building for food, and they'd have one for their ammunition and different things. But you can look up. If you have to ask permission first to see if you can find something. But if you would like to, you can construct it out of twigs out from outside and leaves. You could use popsicle sticks if you want to, and you can make this village. Now, this is optional. You do not have to do this if you don't want to, but it might be fun. If you do it and snap a picture and send it to me, it don't have to be done today, maybe in the next week or so, then I'll give you a grade on that, okay? But you don't have to. It's just optional, okay? That's all for today.